Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Amaranchi Ivani.
And I'm Millicent Walker. Here are the headlines. Shelling still reported in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, despite Russia saying it will scale back attacks near the Ukrainian capital.
A closer look at how Russia intends to beat restrictions on its exportation of gas as we near a deadline proposal for gas payments in rubles.
Plus, they have fled fighting in Ukraine, the fate of Nigerians taking refuge in other Eastern European countries.
A warm welcome once again. Let's bring you up to speed on developments in the last couple of hours. We're learning that Russia's bombardments have intensified east of Ukraine. Russian forces have been tightening their grip on the northern region of Luhansk, but have far less control of Donbass and are intensifying attacks on towns west of the line of contact, which is the front line from the earlier war.
Authorities in Luhansk say there have been 35 artillery attacks on local towns in 2 hours. This morning, blocks of flats and kindergarten were hit in Lysychansk. At least one person was killed, though details cannot be verified. One person died in shelling in Donetsk as well.
Earlier, President Vladimir Putin reportedly said to his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, shelling of the besieged city of Mariupol will only end when Ukrainian troops surrender. French officials say the Russian leader has agreed, however, to consider plans to evacuate civilians from the city. They've described the situation in Mariupol as catastrophic, saying civilian populations must be protected and must leave the city if they wish to, but they must also have access to food, aid, water, and to needed medicine.
Spoke about Russia earlier. The governor of the northern Chernihiv region says Russia has continued to attack the regional capital today, despite the promise to drastically reduce military activity in the area, as well as around Kyiv. Then Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says Crimea, a region annexed by Russia in 2014, is part of Russia, and the Russian constitution has precluded discussing the fate of any Russian region with anyone else.
Played down any hopes of a breakthrough in peace talks. Here's more from day 34. All that reports in a moment. In the meantime, about those peace talks holding in the Turkish capital, Istanbul. They're in the second day of face-to-face talks in 2 weeks. What we know so far, Ukraine has proposed adopting a neutral status in exchange for security guarantees. Russia says it would drastically reduce military combat operations around the capital, Kyiv, and the northern city of Chernihiv. A statement, however, was met with skepticism by the Ukrainians, as well as the US and the UK, who said it should be treated with caution. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has played down any hopes of a breakthrough in the continuing peace talks. He told reporters earlier today Russia had not noticed anything really promising, but says the chief Russian negotiator will provide an update later. Moscow's demands include that Kyiv cede control of territory to Russia. That hasn't changed. It's still not certain exactly what the Russian president wants. He has consistently cast Ukraine, NATO, and the West as enemies of Russia.
Joining us now is Security and Global Affairs Analyst Confidence Makari. He joins us from K2 here in Lagos. Confidence, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you once again for having me.
Do you think the peace talks are making any breakthrough?
Yeah, well, from the Russian side, it doesn't really appear as though they are content with the contents of the peace deals that they've been wanting all along. And I think we have a sharp difference in the reaction to the peace deal. From the Ukrainian side, everything seems quite optimistic, even though they are still requesting more military aid from sympathetic countries. But from the Russian perspective, it doesn't really seem as though they are getting what they want. And then, like you said in your preamble, what the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has been saying doesn't actually look good, because according to them, any mention of Crimea as not being part of Russian territory is something they're not willing to consider, because according to the Russian constitution, it doesn't allow for the negotiation of what areas they consider as Russian territory. But I think a few hours ago, that position was actually softened, and then we had statements from the Kremlin saying that they are likely to consider it as part of the negotiation if the Crimea questions comes up again. So overall, we haven't really seen much. But I think if we're going to be taking feelers from the Ukrainian side, I think we're making a little bit of progress here.
And Confident, some people thought there was some breakthrough. Turkey's president, for example, the fact that both sides showed up, that Ukraine had shifted ground on NATO membership, that Russia would scale back on attacks on Kyiv today. It's almost like Russia did an about-face on promises made yesterday on those attacks. In terms of Russia's sincerity, what would you say? And this is also. One begins to think that perhaps they're also trying to put some sort of indirect pressure on Ukraine to go as far as possible with some of their demands.
Yeah, you could also say that Russian credibility has taken a hit since it told the world that it was not going to invade Ukraine, and still went right ahead into invading the country, and told its population that it was simply carrying out a special military operation just west of its borders. And so in normal circumstances, that is not war. If you're sitting just across the table from Russia, there's a tendency that you're not going to take them quite seriously. But Ukraine is in a position where it has to negotiate, even if its opponents is negotiating in bad faith. I mean, right from when we heard feelers, just a few days after we heard from Ukraine that it has made quite a significant breakthrough by getting 7 states to act as a security guarantee in the future. We saw sustained Russian bombing campaigns in not only Kiev, but also in Chernihiv. And so you could see from their perspective that the Kremlin also feels to an extent that it can get what it wants by crippling Ukraine and crippling its capital. And for the past 1 week or so, it has decided to change tactics, because according to Russian Defense High Command, the first phase of the operation has been achieved. So they've moved tactically into the second phase, which is air campaign to bomb Ukrainian cities into submission. And so, yes, to an extent, you could say that while they are negotiating and saying that, okay, they want this and this person is giving them that, they are also trying to sustain pressure on them by hitting Ukrainian cities very hard. And so the import of what that holds for the talks is anybody's guess. But I do think that perhaps we could see a shift in the talks if Russia gets some other cities that actually wanted, places like Kharkiv, Mariupol, and Chernihiv, that perhaps if they fall to Russian forces, we're likely to see a change in their demands and perhaps ramp up pressure that they've been sustaining for quite some time.
So scores of people have died, confidence, hundreds more have been displaced, many have been forced to flee their homes. As some analysts conclude that the Ukrainian government put citizens through an unnecessary war, only to arrive at the decision to maintain neutral status, which is what Russia wanted from in the first place. Was this all an effort in futility?
It's very difficult to say that a sovereign country deferred to another sovereign country on what organization it would like to use its sovereignty to join. This is what makes a state sovereign and not a vassal of the other power. And so for the people who say that a lot of lives could have been saved if Ukraine has acceded to Russian demands of neutrality, they do have a point on grounds of human lives that have been lost so far. But on what states should do, a sovereign state like Ukraine, it's basically asking for too much, and I think it's quite disrespectful if you're going to be having these discussions in the future, especially not only for the importance of such kind of arguments for Ukraine, Ukraine, but for other countries that are also at the risk of invasion. We have a whole lot of other countries in Africa. We have them in the Middle East and every other part of the world where they are always at risk of invasion by their neighbors. But to the main question of whether this could all be avoided if Ukraine had acceded to Russian demands of neutrality. Well, I think it remains to be seen. Russia has not entirely been friendly to Ukraine since 2014, and even before then, it supported the asset president Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 or in 2013 rather, and then there were some other kind of which of course some people in Western Ukraine didn't see as deserving of a sovereign country. So the point is we're always going to be having these frictions between Russia and Ukraine. The answer to that question is not entirely set in stone for which to say, okay, this could have been avoided. Perhaps if there's a theory that if Russia had gotten what it wanted by having Ukrainian neutrality, it was still going to encroach on Ukrainian territory, we would never have known. But I do think personally that the lives that have been lost would probably have been saved if perhaps further diplomacy had been achieved rather than a resort to conflict.
Well, Confidence Makari, thank you so much for speaking with us. And I know that we'd have loved to have more time with you. Unfortunately, we're running out. Thanks again for joining us on the program.
Thank you once again for having me.
Well, let's now bring you up to speed on day 34 developments of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
This is what is left of an apartment building hit by Russian shelling on a residential area of separatist-held Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. The shelling comes as Ukraine accuses Russia of shelling nearly all cities along the front line separating Ukrainian government-controlled territory from areas held by Russian-backed separatists in eastern Donetsk region. This reporter with China Global Television Network was able to visit the bombed theater in the city of Mariupol. The Mariupol theater was bombed on March 16, causing a large number of casualties. The reporter visited the scene and witnessed the scale of destruction in the surrounding area of the theater. He said he could still hear the whistling sound of artillery while walking through the ruins. Little children wounded in attacks in Mariupol received treatment at a children's hospital where busloads of evacuees have arrived before moving further west, joining an exodus where around a quarter of Ukraine's 44 million people have had to leave their homes to seek refuge either in safe areas of the country or abroad. Meanwhile, the recaptured town of Irpin near the Ukrainian capital Kyiv has become an eerie wasteland of burnt-out homes. The devastation in the town testifies to the horrors of fighting and bombardment there. Bodies of dead civilians lay scattered on the streets as stray dogs roamed between fallen trees and debris. And in a village in Kyiv, heavily damaged houses could be seen on the side of a road. Several buses, a children's playground, and residential buildings were also damaged. In one of the buildings, the soldiers found an abandoned dog who was left behind by his owners when they fled the violence. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko today says the sound of shelling could be heard around the capital, despite Russia's promise. In an address to the European Committee of the Regions, a lesser-known EU institution bringing together local representatives, the former heavyweight boxing champion says battles were taking place near his city.
We received yesterday information. Right now the Russian forces move away from Kyiv. It's not true. Whole night we listen to sirens. It means a reckless attack, and we listen a huge explosion east of Kyiv and north of Kyiv. It's means battles there. The people died, still died.
Meanwhile, Russian shelling damaged a Holocaust memorial on the outskirts of the eastern city of Kharkiv, according to an advisor to Ukraine's Interior Minister, Anton Heroshenko. The monument in the form of a menorah, a 7-branch candelabra, had lost 2 of its branches. An engraving on a stone pillar near the damaged memorial says it pays tribute to more than 16,000 people from the Kharkov Jewish ghetto who were killed by the Nazis from December 1941 to January 1942.
interesting to see all the destruction in Ukraine over the past 1 month. The VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now. She's in Ivano-Frankivsk. Anna, great to see you, and thank you for joining us. We can see there is some sunlight on you today, so better day, perhaps?
Hello. Well, hopefully, but difficult to say if honestly. So, but yeah, hopefully, it's always a hope.
Yeah, and because of, we can actually see the reflection of the sunlight on you, so we know that spring already has broken in Ukraine. And those talks continue today, today being the last day. You heard the Russian government said it does not think that there have been any breakthrough in the talks. What could this mean for the peace deal?
Well, I think that in general, Ukrainians understand that the main negotiation is happening at the battlefield. So I think that what it could mean is that Russia is not ready to talk and discuss a peace deal, because peace deal means well, peace deal means that the interest of both sides, or if we say so, the interest of Ukraine is put on the first place because Ukraine has been attacked. So it should be definitely a compromise, but it seems that Russian side doesn't really consider that and is not ready yet for that. But again, we can see that Russian side they need this dialogue as well, because we can see that they, in terms of the battlefield, they're not really succeeding.
2 days of talks over, and with Russia making that promise yesterday about scaling back on the attacks on Kyiv, and yet overnight there was shelling in Kyiv, there was shelling in Chernihiv, there was also shelling in Donetsk. Had there been any more today?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So despite Russian side said that they will back off and they will stop the intensity of the shelling, unfortunately, this never happened. Mykolaiv region, which is in the south, is also under severe attack, as well as Kharkiv region. The same situation is going on. If we talk about Mariupol and Donetsk region, situation is similar. So honestly, if we look at the situation yesterday, today, and a day before the negotiations, I would say that shelling they actually intensified despite all the talks and all the promises that have been done by the Russian government before the negotiations.
And Anna, seeing as you've mentioned that, would you say perhaps that those meeting from the Russian side are insincere, coming forward to the table to negotiate?
Well, it looks so. At least Ukraine had a very concrete points that Ukraine wants to discuss and wants to consider as the main ones, as the important ones. If we look at the reaction of the Russian side, well, it just seems that they try to press their previous desires, and they try just to relocate their forces. But again, well, I think that for Ukraine, these negotiations were quite important, and it's really great that Ukrainian side managed to pass a very concrete list of demands and list of points which are extremely important for the future peace deal. So I think that this is good for Ukraine, but again, from Russia, it just no negotiation so far.
Perhaps finally, Anna, the mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, also confirmed there had been no scaling back with Russian attacks. There have been reports of air raid sirens going off as well. But tell us about the Ukrainian forces, how they're holding up with this fresh assault, which you said has intensified.
Ukrainian forces understand and Ukrainian government understands that the battlefield is the main negotiation table right now. And the position of the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian president, and Ukrainian forces remains the same. So the fightings will be intensified, or at least they're not gonna be, coming to an end. So everyone understand that, and Ukrainian forces just continue their work. They continue to fight. They continue to retake back the certain territories and protect the territories that have been under the attack so far. So there is no, hope that negotiation is the only way, because we all understand that negotiation could be successful if there is success at the battlefield.
Well, Anna, we're all hoping for the best, really. So many people have died, and we wouldn't want to see any more dead. And we hope that today is a lot better than yesterday, seeing how bright you look today. We're hoping all the best for you. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Coming up after the break, a deal looms for Russia's central bank, the government, and Gazprom to present proposals for gas payments in rubles from so-called unfriendly countries.
Welcome back, and we're following up on a story that broke yesterday. The Russian President Vladimir Putin given the country's central bank, the government, and Gazprom up until March 31st. It's just tomorrow to present proposals for gas payments in rubles from what he calls unfriendly countries, including all European Union states. The Kremlin says Russia is working out methods for accepting payments for its natural gas exports in rubles, and it will make decisions in due course should European countries refuse to pay in the Russian currency. According to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, in our situation, it is hardly possible and appropriate to engage in charity with European customers. But the G7 has agreed to reject the demand. Germany's Energy Minister Robert Habeck says all G7 countries are completely agreed that this would be a one-sided and clear breach of the existing contracts. He also said that the payment in ruble is not acceptable and that the G7 would urge companies affected not to follow President Putin's demand.
Meanwhile, Germany today released an early warning that it could be heading for a gas supply emergency and that the measure was designed to prepare for a possible disruption of stoppage of natural gas flows from Russia. This comes ahead of the deadline given by President Putin to present a new mechanism under which gas payments will be switched to rubles. Under Germany's existing gas emergency plan, the early warning is the first of 3 stages and does not yet imply state intervention. Earlier today, Energy Minister Robert Habeck said in a statement that supplies are safeguarded for the time being and that Germany is closely monitoring supply flows with market operators. Head of German network regulator Klaus Müller said the aim of the early warning was to avoid a deterioration of supply and urged consumers and industry to prepare for all scenarios.
Joining us now are the MD CEO Africa Operations in Lax Limited, Kiari Booker, and here in the studio, oil and gas analyst, Comrade Zaka. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And let me begin with you. Mr. Booker, that the Russian deadline on the payment of gas is tomorrow, when that plan President Putin is supposed to receive. What would be the scenario across Europe when the plan is presented and eventually comes into effect?
There certainly we may see some disruptions. However, I think the Russians have clarified today that it's going to be gradual, because if it is a big bang sort of a cut-off enforcing all the importers to pay in rubles, then we may see disruptions, particularly for gas, because I think Putin's remarks were quite clear. It's only gas he was targeting. And 40% of European imports of gas is Russian. Therefore, it's going to be substantial part of the gas imports to Europe that's going to be dictated. The how and the workability of payments in the rubles have not yet been released by the Russian central bank. I think they must be scratching their heads as to how that is going to be implemented. But the scenario before the war, the Russian-Ukrainian war, had always been that the major banks handle those transactions, along with Gazprom, which is the state-controlled gas company, even though it is a privatized commercial enterprise. And today, what may happen is that if that's the case, and it is rubles that the payments is going to be made, then we may begin to see FX scarcity in Russia, because rather than having Gazprom handling the transactions, it may be coming to the state-controlled banks. And have in mind that the Russian banks, the major banks, have already been cut off from SWIFT, which is the messaging system that globally interconnects all the major banks in the world. And therefore, it has to be some of the smaller banks that have not been affected by the US Treasury sanctions.
Well, I know this is as a result of, the sanctions that European countries have placed on Russia, but looking at it long term, do you think it's sustainable?
It's not sustainable, but it is also a show of the vulnerability of what I would call the Western hegemony, because all payments for gas, oil and gas had always been in what is called petrodollar. It's either in the USD or euro. Now we are hearing Saudi Arabia also reaching out and having transactions in yuan with the Chinese. Indians and Russians are discussing. Indians and Chinese are talking. So essentially what this means is that the dominance of the US dollar may be a threat. I will not call this particular move as the new front in the war, so to speak, because even in good old times, even before the war, the payments have been substantially more in euro than in dollars. I believe 58 or 59% of Russian oil and gas payments from Europe is always coming in euro rather than in the USD. So that may not be a substantial threat, so to speak, to the US dollar, but it is the first shot. And the rest of the world is also following it. So essentially, there is going to be a questioning of the dominance of the US dollar as the currency, as the primary currency in the world, so to speak. I mean, it will continue for a time being, but once there is a break, it's not going to be back again to the golden old days, so to speak.
Let's bring in Mr. Comrade Zaka here, and this is even at the height of the Cold War. Russia didn't necessarily shut down gas exports, and neither did they during the first fighting with Ukraine in 2009.
That's right.
So looking at this, what do you think is different this time? What could happen based on what they're proposing for gas?
Well, I'm expecting what I can best describe as a disequilibrium and a quake in the global oil and gas industry as we speak right now. And I see Russia taking it through unless the global leaders decide to come together and get these problems of Russia and Ukraine resolved. And the reasons are straightforward. Before now, I mean, the currency of transaction in the oil and gas industry, the international currency of transaction is the dollar. Everybody knows that. And before now, the dollar became the currency of transaction because the global cartel for crude oil is being led by Saudi Arabia. When you talk about crude oil, and the US was able to get across through Saudi Arabia to make dollar the currency of transaction. But when you talk about gas, gas is different. First of all, when you talk about OPEC, now Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, it's been led by by Saudi Arabia. But Russia also is the country leading the non-OPEC members as far as the crude oil cartel is concerned. Then as you switch to gas now, there is a different cartel for gas now called Gas Exporting Countries Forum, with headquarters in Doha, Qatar. And the members of Gas Exporting Countries Forum are Algeria, Bolivia, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Iran, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, then Russia. Then you have Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. And if you look at it from that angle, we're talking about a gas cartel now that is very strong now and can rival OPEC. And when you talk about fossil fuel, people are actually moving away from even crude oil, looking towards gas. So to that extent, Russia is likely to be very strong. And in the gas cartel also, look at the countries. Is Venezuela a friend of the US? Is Libya a friend of the US? Is Iran a friend of the US? So if you look at it from that angle, probably they have just felt it's time to probably even break away from the dominance or influence of the US and probably the dollar.
What impact do you think this will have? I mean, the G7 countries have rejected it. Germany is crying out at what it might suffer in the future.
It's going to be irrelevant to Russia and the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. And the reasons are also simple. Russia has the gas. If Russia cuts the gas, Germany will be asphyxiated. It's as straightforward as that. So all that needs to happen is to negotiate. And the worst thing that will happen is for Ukraine to say the gas will not pass through Ukraine. And Russia will decide to bypass Ukraine. But now
they could also decide to pay with the rubles, right?
Everything is about the rubles. It's either you accept the rubles or Germany go elsewhere. Because today when you talk about trading partners in Europe, Germany gains from that. And when you talk about crude oil, there are customers of Russia like China. Then you have Germany. Then you have the Netherlands. So if these countries are there, I mean, the US can be asked to go to wherever. Not necessarily to hell.
Mr. Booker, back to you now. And I know that, many of the European countries as well as NATO allies struggled with this, imposing any sanctions on Russian gas or Russian oil because they know the implications of this, of course, right? So G7 countries have rejected it, but what alternatives do they have at this point?
They don't have much of an alternative. I mean, even the remarks made by the Russian energy minister, I believe, about the early warning alert.
Germany, you mean?
More of Germany, yes. It's more of a long-term, medium to long-term strategy rather than what is happening today. And mind you, the U.S. Treasury sanction, when it was being imposed, they knew that Europe depends on Russian energy, and therefore there is an exemption for Russian imports of oil and gas. Now, that basically clearly tells everybody that the Europeans would not have joined, or NATO rather, wouldn't have joined if they do not have that exemption. So that must have been discussed behind the scenes before it happened. Now, the real effect on Russian energy, it's two-way. It's a war that really has no winner. If you talk about this in the analogy of a war, that is that Russia depends on the foreign currencies to settle its debts. In fact, there was an effect on the ruble as well as on the Russian economy, because people were thinking that Russia would default on its debts, on its bonds. And what has happened is that Russia settled their bond payments yesterday in US dollars. So essentially, that basically means that the bluff of Putin had not come to pass. And essentially, Russia needs, otherwise Russian economy, as we speak, is spiraling into a recession. And so will Germany, by the way, if the gas got cut off. In fact, Europe will also face recession should there be a prolonged war, prolonged discussions on this Russian payments in rubles, because the modalities have not yet been worked out. And if it does work out, it may strengthen the ruble, because it did in the last few days. I think the ruble went up by somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% or thereabout. Before, it fell by close to 40%. Now it is down 25% pre-war. So essentially what that means is that no one is going to come out as a winner in this game of chicken. But at the end of the day, I would expect cooler heads would prevail.
Yeah, and I'm wondering here, the impact this will have on Russia's economy. Mr. Zaka mentioned, the countries, the gas cartel, and I'm sure that that's where Russia is looking, to send most of its gas to, because if European countries are cutting them off, they still have a market. But how much of a revenue will that be bringing in for Russia, and then how much of a deficit would it be for the other countries?
Well, in terms of revenue, I believe last year oil and gas sales to Europe generated somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 billion for Russia. Now, that's huge. In fact, it's the substantial income of Russia depends on European energy supplies. The rest of the world is smaller. The reason being that the Russian-European pipeline is completed, and it has been working for years. Whereas if you are going to sell to China, you have to move it in tanks. So there would be a logistical issue. But once you start supplies, it kicks in place. There would be a certain amount of delay factor, but once that's over, then you're fine. So it's not as easy as just turning the taps on and off either. In the case of gas supply, you have to cap it. You have to cap the facility, so to speak. Now, that requires a certain amount of work, and it's better to burn the gas than to cap it, because then there would be an element of engineering. Russia needs the FX to also import equipment and all the tools for the energy production itself. Russia, mind you, is one of the largest producers of gas. I believe they are number one, with Qatar following, and of course Venezuela. But in terms of oil as well, Russia produces decent amount of oil per day. So all of those combined makes the economy of Russia heavily dependent on oil and gas exports.
Comrade Zaka, and this is what the EU countries have said, Russia is not entitled to withdraw contracts. Do you see legal battles anyway?
Well, I see a lot of legal battle, but hey, between you and I, Russia is not really bothered about the EU countries. Russia is after the US. Russia wants to tell the US to go to hell. It's as straightforward as that. Because when you talk about the Russian gas is principally for Europe, right? And the other friends of Russia or customers of Russia are countries like Germany, China, and the Netherlands. And as we speak right now, I don't know, you must have heard the US now trying to patronize Venezuela after everything that has happened. The US is trying to patronize Iran. And the US is even trying to tell some refineries to go into quick engineering and engineer their refineries to be able to receive crude oil, which is not going to be possible because really some desperate. Of those refineries were already destined or were designed to receive what we call heavy crude oil. But now they will be forced to receive what we call light crude oil, like the Bonny Light, which is not easy engineering. So the Russia is basically telling the US, I won't allow you to muzzle me.
Amara, it seems to suggest that Russia was the only country prepared for this invasion.
Indeed. And just very quickly, I was wondering, what this impact will be on Nigeria. I know we don't export our own gas, but in the long run, what will this mean for us?
Well, it's very, very unfortunate for Nigeria because from what is happening, some will gain, some will lose, but for Nigeria, it's going to be a mix because Nigeria is a member of OPEC and Nigeria is also a member of Gas Exporting Countries Forum. So when you look at it from the crude oil side, if we had been refining internally, this would have been the best time for Nigeria to start exporting to some of the countries that will not get refined products from elsewhere. Then if Nigeria has stuck to her vision of the trans-Saharan gas pipeline, this will have been the time that European countries will turn to Nigeria, because the plan then was to construct gas pipeline from the Nigerian Niger Delta through North Africa, through the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. This will have been the right time to switch to the Nigerian gas. But unfortunately, that dream or vision didn't crystallize.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. We never seem to have enough time for these conversations, do we? Comrade Zaka, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Kiari Buka, thank you again for your analysis. Really, really precious and invaluable to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Still ahead, from celebrity chef to the front lines, how Ukraine's Igvan Klopotenko is helping to feed Ukrainian troops defending their country on the war front. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Just 1 month into the conflict in Ukraine, United Nations World Food Programme says it's providing emergency food assistance to 1 million people in the country and has built systems able to deliver food at scale to communities in need. Trucks, trains and minivans deliver food supplies to the most vulnerable people across Ukraine, and more convoys are expected in the coming days.
Following a massive scale-up of operations, WFP has provided 330,000 loaves of freshly baked bread to families in the city of Kharkiv, cash assistance to displaced people in Lviv, and ready-to-eat food in various parts of the country. The emergency food supplies have also made it to the conflict areas of Sumy and Kharkiv through 2 interagency humanitarian convoys.
This crisis has displaced millions and millions of people from their cities, from their homes. They are fleeing into other countries as well in search of refuge. The World Food Programme in 1 month has been able to reach 1 million people with critical assistance, and we are in the process of establishing logistics bases and other hubs across the country so that we can continue to provide support to people. Ukraine used to feed 400 million people worldwide, and it's so easy to see tracts of arable land, rich soils, good rains, mechanized agriculture. But the problem now is that a huge question mark now looms on the next harvest, because those agricultural fields are now the battlefields, and the impact will be felt thousands and thousands of miles away from the battlefield.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine prompted an exodus of nearly 4 million people and an outpouring of support for many of the refugees. But a new report finds dozens of people of color who fled Ukraine being held in long-term detention centers in Poland and Estonia. Reports also suggest the European Union's Temporary Protection Directive sets a double standard by permitting the safe entry of Ukrainian citizens into neighboring countries while withholding protection to third-party nationals escaping the same conflict.
Joining us for more on this, Chibuzo Onwugbunu, NIDO Europe Executive Lead, Nigerians in Diaspora Ukraine Relief. She joins us from London, and also Tosa Ogene Fejiro, Welfare Officer with Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, all the way from Warsaw. Thank you both for joining us on the program. I'd like to begin with you, Tosa, and the situation in Poland. It's one of the countries that's taken in the highest number of refugees from Ukraine. How would you describe the experience?
At first, it wasn't really easy at all. It was, I really don't know how to describe it, but it wasn't easy because there were lots of students coming from the Ukraine side down to Poland, and Poland was really shocked with a lot of people. So it wasn't easy moving from Ukraine, like moving the students from Ukraine down to Poland.
So I know that Even with that, Tosa, Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, also the Nigerian Embassy were instrumental to the successful evacuation of Nigerian students back to Nigeria, and not all of them. Are you still hearing from students or other Nigerians stuck in Ukraine?
Yes, the last time I heard from anyone stuck in Ukraine was last month, and those were students from Sumi. So since then, I've not had anything from them. Then other students I had from, there are about three Nigerians I know about. They are actually at the detention center here in Poland. And we've been trying to see a way to get them out, which is not possible. They've been there since February 24th, if I'm not mistaken. And this is already 30th March. So those are the ones I know of. And most people moved back to Nigeria. Some moved from Poland back to Germany. Some went to Estonia. Some went to France. So Nigerian students are moving to different places now from Poland.
Why are they still there? Yes, so sorry, but why are they in detention in Poland?
Okay, this set of guys that called me on the 24th February, they told me that they called me on the 24th of February, yeah? And I was told by one of them, which is Mr. Christian, he told me that some guys picked him up from the border and they took him to a train station. They told him to sign a form, of which I told him not to sign international protection. He should sign war declaration because he's leaving Ukraine because of the war. So I told him not to be scared because to me, I was thinking it was normal Polish people that were trying to help, like other Polish citizens, like the citizens from Poland, they were actually trying to help. Unknowingly to us, it was border control to them. So they were taken to courts and all. At the end of the day, he said it was because it was not with his international passports, of which he got to Ukraine last year, December. And getting to Ukraine last year, December, his documents are still with the agents, which they are to process his post-visa or so, post-visa from Ukraine. So now he moved during the war, he had to move from Ukraine to Poland without a document, and he was held on detention.
Interesting. He didn't reach out to the Nigerian embassy. Thank you for bringing that up, Tosan. Chibuzo, your turn now. You're all the way in the UK. You've also been on top of the situation with relief for students in Ukraine, setting up Telegram, and also keeping in touch with them even after they get out of Poland. And you're still in touch with those who decided to stay. Tell us your current challenges.
Okay, so there's a lot in terms of, I can talk about currently what the situation is now. So students are going to different countries. They're trying to get, to different countries. Some of them want to study. Some of them try to basically get accommodation, basically start their life again. So it's a challenge at the moment. Some of them actually have run out of money. Some of them, because they've lost a lot, some of them actually, whilst being in Ukraine, lost a lot of their personal possessions, money and all that, because they had to spend a lot of money even to get out of Ukraine. Remember, the prices were actually quite high for taxis, even though some organizations help like us, but still they are going through a lot of hardship. Their accommodation is not secure, so some of them have like maybe 2 weeks, 1 month accommodation. Some of them don't even have accommodation at all. So some of them are actually staying in like shelters. So what we're doing right now is really trying to get through to other organizations that can support. We also have NIDO Poland has a hostel. NIDO Hungary has accommodation arrangements. So we're just working with different students to see what their needs are. Remember, I communicate with them regularly via, they're all in our Telegram groups, which is a huge Telegram groups that we created just when the crisis started. I think I was mentioning to one of you earlier that what we did was just to support the crisis was I started tweeting out numbers when the crisis started, numbers of all the NIDO chapters. So they were having all the calls. So someone like Tosan, who's in Poland, they were getting lots of calls. We created Telegram groups so that people can actually go into those groups and we could see the people asking for help. Oh, I'm stuck in this border. I've been dragged out of train. I have been, I'm in a bus that have been dragged out of, so many things. So right now, after the challenges that they faced, they are now facing a new challenge, which is really trying to settle, trying to get to school, trying to get a place where they can get residence permits, to even stay. So for me, I'm working with a number of African organizations to say, let's see how we can push the minimum that these students that have decided to stay. Sorry.
I didn't mean to cut in there, but perfect timing for you anyway. Ladies, we'll have to invite you back. I think we just scratched the surface today, learning more about these Nigerians who are still stuck in other situations, having fled the war in Ukraine. We hope you'll join us. We know that you have pushed back a lot to be here on the program today. We appreciate it, but we do ask that you do come back to talk more about this. Thank you again, Chibuzo and Tosan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we end the show, when Russia began its assault on Ukraine in February, Kyiv-based Ukrainian chief Kleptenko's gut reaction was not to pick up a gun. Instead, it was to go into the kitchen to whip up meals for those on the front line. That's right. So he was a celebrity chef. There he is, whipping up those surprises. So his restaurant also has been feeding those on the front lines. It's called Inchi, Ukrainian for Others. Only open for just a week, and it serves free meals to anyone who asks for menu number 2. The menus feature traditional Ukrainian dishes from across the country and changes every day according to the availability of ingredients. The great thing was he was given a month's free rent. Yeah, we didn't mention that, right? Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'm Millicent Walker. Good evening.